The relation between ethics and theology, according to Dr. Gordon H. Clark. A common objection to Christianity in general, and Calvinism in particular, is that it is immoral. Atheists object to blood atonement, while Arminians, Molinists, and others object to God's absolute control of all things, including our wills and destinies. In the following remarks, Dr. Gordon H. Clark addresses this issue. To such an extent has the Christian ideal been accepted by all classes of people, in theory if not in practice, that it has been possible to argue, since Christian ideals are best, the Christian religion must be true. And the defense of Christianity against its enemies has often rested on the assumption of its moral excellence. But suppose the moral excellence of Christianity is denied. There may have been a time and place when such a denial was unthinkable. Today, however, voices are raised in favor of other types of morality. This is true not only in atheistic Russia, not only in the recent National Socialism of Germany, it is true also in the case of respected theologians in Boston and New York who reject the blood of Christ. In fact, one of the basic attacks on Orthodox Christianity is that it is immoral. To meet this criticism, the old argument must be recognized as inverted. One cannot argue the truth of Christianity on the basis of its ethics. One must defend its ethics, if at all, on the basis of its truth. The ethics is a logical consequence of the truth, not its cause. No one with any Christian training would, I suppose, want to deprecate morality. Nevertheless, it is quite possible so to exaggerate its importance, so to misunderstand its relative place in philosophy, that only confusion, both moral and theoretical, can result. This overemphasis on morality, so it would seem, is an important contributory cause to the rise of modernism. The authority of conscience was insisted upon. A moral consciousness was developed. Ethical institutions were sought for. And as these aspects of human nature, indispensable as they are, were continually brought forward, they came to usurp the position of supreme judge. It seems that the Christian conscience has so developed that it is all conscience and no longer Christian. Moral sense has become the judge of truth and error. Let us therefore face the question squarely. Should ethics determine our theology, or should theology determine our ethics? Nor permit it to be said that each influences the other. However true that may be in some sense of the words, one theorem or set of theorems cannot be both consequence and postulate. Is theology or ethics logically prior? Our answer depends on our general view of the world as a whole, and particularly on our concept of God. To illustrate, we may summarily divide all philosophies, very roughly, into two types. The first type may be termed naturalism, and be taken to include all systems which picture the ultimate as either law or fact. The second type of philosophy may properly be called Christian theism. In this system, facts and laws are not ultimate. God is ultimate, the only living and true triune personal God. If then God is supreme, and all facts and laws depend on his ordinance, it follows that no law, fact, or world of ideas is superior to him. Most people find it easy to conceive God as creating physical law by divine fiat. He made water so that it would freeze at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. He might have made some other world in which water would have frozen at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. God could have reversed all this, but as a matter of fact, God chose to create the sort of world we actually live in. Now, for some peculiar reason, people find difficulty in applying the same consideration to ethical laws. Instead of recognizing God as sovereign in the moral sphere, they seem ordinarily to think of him as being compelled by some vague, superior power to make morality what it is, a remnant of the Platonic world of ideas. But it seems more reasonable to think of God as just as untrammeled in creating moral distinctions as in creating physical facts. Once then we are able thoroughly to grasp the absolute sovereignty of God in all realms, our initial moral problem is solved. Morality, like the physical universe and its laws, is what it is because God made it that way. The view then would be that the nature of God is not to be determined by means of our consciences or intuitions, but these rather are to be corrected in the light of the nature of God. If the scriptures teach vicarious punishment and our consciences don't like it, so much the worse for our consciences. In the determination of truth, such personal subjective considerations are to be eliminated. At this point, some very conscientious persons raise an apparently serious objection to the view here outlined. If this view were true, they say, honesty might not be the best policy. If morality depends purely on God's ordinance, just as the laws of physics, then possibly stealing would be right, and right would be wrong. That we have become accustomed to given ethical standards is no reason for believing that God had to make the world that way. Even if our moral opinions are correct, it is no more a reason for so believing than our knowledge of physics is for putting God under the compulsion of physical laws. Anything God does is right because he does it. And had we no knowledge of God, we could not guess what sort of moral standards he might set up for some hypothetical world not now in existence. To those who still have doubts about this way of stating things, it is recommended first to consider the attitude of some heathen man who, with a conscience as void of offense as was Paul's when persecuting the infant church, is sacrificing his child as a religious rite. If theology must be based on ethics and conscience, there is nothing to be said to such a heathen. From childhood, he has been taught that it would be immoral to omit these rites. If you should force him or half persuade him to neglect them, he would suffer the pangs of conscience. The man who asserts that conscience is the final judge must accept the dictates of the heathen conscience, if not as a rule of his own conduct, at least as an inviolable rule for the heathen. He cannot argue that God does not want human sacrifice, because, on his theory, theology or knowledge of God depends on how one's conscience feels. In the second place, anyone who has doubts about God's sovereignty over the laws of conduct may consider the position of him who claims that Orthodox Christianity is immoral. The same results follow. For him his anti-Christian conscience is basic, and the only God whom he can come to know is an anti-Christian God. It is thus clear that if conscience is made basic, there is no method left by which one can argue for a change of conscience. The burning of widows in India and the urbanity of a Unitarian are equally justified. Each is conscientious. In view of this, the conclusion seems forced. We must adjust our ethics to our theology, not vice versa. We must argue not from our moral standards to the truth of the Bible, but from the truth of the Bible to the morality it upholds. New Heavens, New Earth, pages 51 to 56, by Dr. Gordon H. Clark.